if I create the environment, I can, to a good extent, create the individual. And therefore, the people in power will read this statement and they will go back to their planning boards and say, how can I create the environment such that black people will be dumb? They will be ignorant. They will hate themselves. They will lack disunity in their relationships one with the other. They will see me as the final validator of truth. They will see my acceptance as the ultimate acceptance. How can I create in them that mentality? And you will see them then creating the appropriate environment. The invasion of this community by Asians and other ethnic groups is a part of the creation of the mentality and personality of black people. It's going to create your children out here. As they walk down these blocks, their personality is being formed as they learn to so-called cope and deal with this situation out here. And to the extent that we sit back and let it happen, to that extent, we're participating also in their creation. It goes on to say, for social learning theorists, behavior is the result of a continuous interaction between personal and environmental variables. Environmental conditions shape behavior through learning. A person's behavior, in turn, shapes the environment. There's a reciprocal relationship. We create the environment and we create a behavior orientation. And then the person with the behavior orientation, what? Recreates his environment. You put him in a slum, and then he develops slummy behavior. And then once he develops slummy behavior, he will make slums wherever he goes. And then we will say that he's a slummy person by nature. You know, that's the game. Create it. Create that environment so as to create a personality. And you see, it's a slick game. And often you see as people, we are not aware of the first creation. How was the first creation brought about? The only thing we often see as a result of the creation, and we see ourselves behaving in a certain sort of way, and the other group then says, you behave that way because you're black. You behave that way because you're African. You see? And when you fail then to see how the situation was created, then one begins to condemn himself in terms just of himself. And this is why knowledge of how the situation was created is very, very important. This is why ultimately when one gets to know himself, he gets to know other people. You cannot know yourself well and not know other people and ultimately know the universe. The route to getting to know the universe and to getting to know what is going on in the world is through the self, ladies and gentlemen. Because as I stated before, the self is the result of the universe we live in. And therefore self-knowledge means getting to know self-creation. And when other people have created the self that one is, then it means getting to know those other people and getting to know how they went about their creation. And that's very important to the recreation of oneself in terms of one's own criteria and one's own values. But unless you get there, and this you see is an essential part of African education. The white people don't have to learn this. They don't need to learn this. So therefore, they do not include this knowledge into their curriculum. They do not see it as an important part of education. And a black person then who does not include this as an important part of their education is going to be educated into ignorance and stupidity. And a black person who sees this kind of education as a SOP course, as a, elective, of course you pick up on the side, is one that's going to be miseducated. This is the very foundation and basis of any sound education and should occur first, not second, not in the third year of college, not in the last year of college, but should occur in the very first semester. Should occur really in the very first years of elementary school and work themselves right on up. And so we have it here. The environmental conditions shape behavior through learning. A person's behavior in turn shapes the environment. Persons and situations influence each other reciprocally. To predict behavior, we need to know how the characteristics of the individual interact with the characteristics of the situation. Now, I've often told people the point of psychology, European psychology, is control. You know, a lot of people talk about psychology not being so-called science and not being able to predict behavior the way chemistry and mathematics. That's off the point. That's really not the point of it at all. Because the point of psychology in the Eurocentric sense is not really to describe man as he is. but to learn the ways and means of controlling man to the benefit of the European. That's the basic point. And when you can create people, when you can control people, then your problem of prediction is what? It's solved, ladies and gentlemen. It's solved. You see? So when you remove you remove certain thinking skills from people, when you introduce into them certain emotional orientations, when you keep away from them certain intelligence in terms of knowledge, you're creating a personality, and you can begin to predict how those people are most likely to behave under certain circumstances. You know what they are capable of doing. You see? And therefore, as a Eurocentric psychologist, what you're mainly concerned with is not so much predicting the behavior, but creating the possibilities of some behaviors and the impossibilities of others. And so the main thing you're concerned with is the technique by which this is accomplished, because the prediction part will pretty much take care of itself. And so we have it right here. To predict, we need to know how the characteristics of the individual interact with the characteristics of the situation. You have to interpret this Afrocentrically, you see. Now, many courses will read it and run it through just like that and leave it at that. But see, the white boy, that's all he needs. He doesn't need the other part, the part that I've just talked to you about right now. Because you see, while he's in the college, his dad is another who already manipulated the world. You see, and when he gets out, he will enter into that system and learn the real information. But the black one who will learn it as well or better will still be in a position of powerlessness. You see, because often he has not read between the lines, and often because he's discriminated against, he will not get into the very center of power where he can see the real deal. And so he'll be left with his theoretical propositions, and he'll be proud of his unrealistic learning. And he will talk about it and think that his degree, because it is equal to some white man's degree, that it has equal potency, and it does not. It has very little meaning. In fact, that is a part of the deception as well. It goes on to say, reinforcement and social learning. The effect of other people, the rewards and punishments they provide, is an important influence on an individual's behavior. Very important statement there, isn't it? In fact, that is a power statement, isn't it? Yeah, it's a power statement. Infused throughout this whole thing is, how do you gain power and influence over other people? How do you manipulate other people? This is a manual about power. Of course, it isn't written that way, is it? It's pure, bland, objective, non-racial psychology. Nonsense. There is no course that's non-political. That is the greatest deception run upon black people, that courses are non-political. That is the most political statement of all. Oh, this is an objective course. It has nothing to do with race. Then I'm in the wrong course. According to social learning theory, individual differences in behavior result in large part from differences in the kinds of experiences encountered, listen, in the course of growing up. Did we hear that? Very powerful statement here. What does it say? Individual differences. And when I use the word individual, think of group. This is another deception that is run on black people, particularly in psychology. Because often the psychology is projected as being about individuals. You see, and often the black student then thinks in terms of individuals, and consequently is restricted in what he learns. When you're in these courses and they talk about individual, elevate them up to the group level. You see, because it's to the advantage of the white man, in a sense, while he's educating you at the same time, to lower your consciousness to talk about individuals, see, so that you can think that we're just concerned with single entities and not with what? Peoples and the relationships of people one to the other. And if you don't deliberately and consciously say, wait a minute, let me think about this in terms of groups, then you're caught and miseducated right at that point, even though you know the principle well. It says individual differences, but let's substitute the word group. Group differences in behavior result in large part from differences in the kinds of learning experiences encountered in the course of growing up. In other words, then, the differences in groups, to a good extent, is a result of the kind of learning experiences they have encountered. So, if you want to create group differences, what do you create? You create differences in their learning experiences. That is why the European, in order to create the African man, must also restrict the African experience, must restrict the kinds of experiences you have. Because an experience is not just an emotional kind of situation, it is a learning situation. An experience becomes often a permanent part of the personality. So you must see experience as learning, okay, not just an emotional effect, but as a learning. When you're in a classroom, you're having an experience. We call that experience learning, but nevertheless, it's an experience. Any kind of experience can be a learning situation. So consequently, if the European is to produce group differences in behavior, he then must have control over the experiences people undergo. And therefore, when they experience poor housing, when they experience poor food, non-nutritional food, when they experience poor schooling, when they experience adverse economic circumstances, when they experience the degradation and scandalization of their character, when they experience the kinds of things we talk about here daily in this community, then you're going to get a difference in group behavior. And you will see then that this experience is deliberately designed to create a deliberate personality in black people. Some of you heard me talk about the rat, and this social learning theory is based on what we call rat psychology. And it's very interesting, by the way, why in these psych books you have talk about rats and dogs. Because often the unaware African thinks that that's what the whole field is about, rats and dogs. Another consciousness controlling tool. And as soon as you mention conditioning, somebody will jump up, oh, the Pavlovian dog. You know, they're going to immediately show you how smart they are in terms of the Pavlovian dog. You see? And how smart they are about the rat and you know, the Skinner box. But if you talk to them for a whole night, they never quite get around to how it is that we are the Pavlovian dog. And that we are the rat. We never see that part. And yet, look at it, ladies and gentlemen. When we talk about the so-called Skinner rat, it's a rat taken out of its natural habitat, placed in a box. It is placed in a condition, a new set of conditions, a new environment. It's going to have experiences in that box it has never had before in its life. It must learn to survive in that box and cope with that box. It must learn to push that lever in order to eat. It has never had to do that before. Never. But it's got to learn. It's got to learn that when the yellow light comes on, it can push the lever and get food. But when the green one comes on, no food is coming. It has to learn that it can get food every time it pushes the lever, or to get food every 5th time it pushes the lever, or every 15th time it pushes the lever, or to get food every 5 minutes, and you can just manipulate its behavior around and around and around. The experimenter says, okay, you're not going to eat until you hit the bar 5 times, 15 times. And sometimes you can see the rat even learns that, you know. It just doesn't hit the food sometimes steadily. You may hit it fast 15 times. Or the experimenter says, I'm going to feed you every 5 minutes regardless of how many times you hit the bar. And that rat will get a sense of time and coming. Toward the end of that 5 minutes, then it'll start hitting the bar. You see? And you can manipulate and change this behavior in terms of how you're going to reward it and how you're going to punish it. It knows something now, and it behaves now in a way that no other rat behaves. It has learned something new. Why? Because it has been placed under a set of conditions. It has learned to adjust to those conditions and to cope with those conditions. If it went back to its natural habitat, it would be a strange rat, I'm telling you.